Joining us now, National Security Council Communications Coordinator John Kirby. Admiral, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start from increasing statements. Axios reported this last night about Iran sending a message to Israel on Saturday stressing it doesn't want further escalation in the Hamas-Israel war, but that it will have to intervene if the Israeli operation in Gaza continues. By all accounts, that is what's going to happen. They're talking about intervening, getting involved. What does that say to you? How do you interpret that, and how worried are you about them getting off, what is indirectly probably on the sidelines for them right now?
We are worried about the potential escalation and widening of this conflict. We don't want to see any actor, be it a state actor like Iran or another terrorist group like Hezbollah, widening this conflict, opening up additional fronts that will distract the Israeli Defense Forces from their primary fight against Hamas. And that is why the president ordered the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group into the Eastern Mediterranean as a strong deterrent message. And that is why we also just recently announced that the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier and her escort ships will be heading that way to be available for regional deterrent operations.
That asks the question then about those assets in the area. Our next guest, Senator Tom Cotton, has said Special Operations Forces should be there. They have an obligation to get Americans out, especially those we think may be being held hostage. Would we have U.S. boots on the ground for that or any other operation you can see?
So let me take this in chunks. There's no plans or intentions to put U.S. troops on the ground to fight in this fight between Israel and Hamas. We are actively trying to find out exactly where they are. I mean, Shannon, we don't even know how many exactly. We saw a small handful we know, but there could be more than we know. They could be in different groups. They could be moved around. I think you can understand, I hope everybody can understand, that we're going to be careful about what we say publicly about our efforts to get those hostages home. Secretary Blinken's in the region right now, traveling around. This is high on his agenda. I can tell you we're working this literally by the hour. But we're not going to get ahead of where we are in terms of policy options since we don't have necessarily all the information we need to try to get them home. I will say last thing, and I promise I'll stop, is this is obviously high on the president's priority list. Nothing's more important to him than the safety and security of Americans that are held hostage overseas, and we're not going to stop until we can get them back with their families.
Would you absolutely rule out the possibility of any kind of U.S. forces being on the ground there?
What I won't do is rule anything in or out when it comes to getting our hostages home. We're working on this literally by the hour. But again, in order for you to develop specific policy options, you got to have a lot more contextual information than it's available to us right now, and we're working at that.
So let's talk about Iran's involvement. The Wall Street Journal had reporting there was direct involvement with this, saying Iranian security officials helped plan Hamas's Saturday surprise attack on Israel and gave the green light for the assault at a meeting in Beirut last Monday. They cite numerous different sources. They talk about multiple meetings in Beirut.
Yeah.
Washington Post says this, even if you don't see the direct link yet. They quote a Western intelligence official saying, if you train people on how to use weapons, you expect them to eventually use them. Does the White House need a direct link on this specific attack to hold Iran in some way accountable?
Well, of course Iran is broadly complicit here. And of course the resourcing and training they've given to Hamas has obviously helped Hamas function and be able to conduct the terrorist attacks that they have been able to conduct. We have held Iran accountable. The attacks on our troops in Iraq and Syria have greatly decreased because of our retaliatory strikes. There's the longest truce in Yemen now in place, saving literally tens of thousands of Yemeni lives. We have added military capabilities into the Gulf region, additional ships, a different aircraft. Now we're bolstering our military presence in the Eastern Med. There should be anybody mistaking the fact that we haven't continue to hold Iran accountable. Think about the support they're giving to Russia and Ukraine and the additional sanctions that we put on them for sending drone technology. So, of course, we're holding them accountable. Now, Shannon, we're looking specifically at the intel stream as much as we can. That work hasn't hasn't stopped. We just haven't seen anything in the intel that we've been looking at that directly points to specific participation by Iran in these attacks. That doesn't mean we aren't still looking for it, just haven't found it. I've seen the press reporting. We're not able to corroborate that.
So when you say holding them accountable, the pushback you're going to get on that. A lot of people out there say we unfreeze $6 billion of their money, but giving them access to that doesn't look like we're punishing them. And there are questions about whether we can even, as there's been talk of, quote, quietly freezing it, if we can do that. Andy McCarthy, one of our colleagues writing over at National Review, says with the ransom already paid and the hostages released, what legal mechanism does the administration have to compel Qatar to return the funds to U.S. control such that they could be frozen, redirected, and otherwise kept out of Tehran's coffers? He says, can you do that? Is there actually a string attached somewhere? And if not, why not? Why would we open up $6 billion to them without some kind of strings to pull it back if in a situation like this?
So not a dime has been spent.
Correct.
Not a dime has been accessed. The Iranian regime never gets it. The money was never frozen when it was in South Korea, any more than it was frozen when it got to Qatar. And it was part of a series of accounts set up by the Trump administration. There was no hue and cry back then when Secretary Pompeo announced these accounts and that the Iranians spent down billions of dollars from the other accounts for what was supposed to be humanitarian purposes, but we don't really know. None of that, we can't account for that. I can only account for that $6 billion, and it's all still in Qatar. None of it has been accessed, and we're watching it like a hawk.
Will they ever be able to access it? Is it truly that you can refreeze it in essence, or whatever terminology you'd like to use, so they don't have access to it?
They have not accessed it.
We
are
know
watching
that,
it. We're watching it like a hawk, Shannon. I'm telling you that we are keeping tabs on every single dime of that. None of it is accessed by the Iranians, and even if it was, it would go to vendors that we approve to buy food, water, medicine, and ship it in to Iran, right to the Iranian people through humanitarian aid organizations. The regime never sees it.
But fair to say that it relieves other financial obligations for them if they know that they can get help on these other fronts through money coming in.
Yeah.
I mean, the State Department tells us that Iran gives $100 billion a year in support to Palestinian terror groups.
This is the fungibility argument, which is also a false argument, too. It's not like the Iranians were sitting around saying, well, we have $6 billion that we can free up to go fund terrorists and not we don't have to worry about feeding our people. They never were worried about feeding their people. They were never worried about actual humanitarian assistance to their own population. And again, they don't have any access to it. The other argument is that the support to terrorists, that has been long-standing under previous administrations as well.
So why
and
make
it's
it
not
any easier
like
for them?
We haven't made it easier, Shannon. We have, in this administration alone, just in the 2.5 years the president's been in office, 400 entities sanctioned for a range of reasons, 30 additional sanction regimes and 300 entities just in the last year alone. And again, we've increased our military presence. This idea that we're just somehow turning a blind eye, whistling past the graveyard as Iran supports terrorist networks is just not true.
Let me ask you about the southern border, because obviously the chaos there, the openness, you can argue about that, but I mean, record numbers of people showing up there, record numbers of people who are either on a terror list or associated with somebody who is a family member, an associate. We're at record numbers for those. How worried are you, as somebody who is, your job is national security, that we have an issue there with somebody who would be a bad actor, a copycat, or a terrorist cell?
We're concerned about the potential spillover from the war against Hamas in terms of domestic security. That's why days ago, I mean, within a day or two of the attacks, the president ordered the team, the national security team and the Department of Homeland Security to work with state and local authorities to make sure that we have the intel picture in place to be able to identify and potentially disrupt any domestic terror threat as a result of what's going on against Hamas. And I will tell you that even as we were speaking here this morning, we simply don't have any specific credible threat to speak to, but that doesn't mean we're not looking very, very hard.
Admiral, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You bet.